one, and there's the password right there. That's a hotspot that's sitting there. You can use it as a.
Okay, thank you.
I got a whiteboard. That's awesome.
It's a whiteboard.
Substantive note taker, you. Had you not done that, how many meetings do you think I would have gone without even noticing?
You all last night too.
This is what I'm talking about. At least one is the answer, probably two. Yeah, that's awesome.
We are. Do you want?
I don't believe they are, Mr. Mayor.
Just to,
Someone's
do
saying they
you?
can't access their packet.
No, I'm okay, go ahead.
What? No, no, oh
Okay,
no,
Jeff.
no, 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 not that ready. Ready. Hang on.
Okay, thank you. I'm connected.
Yeah, you got it? Okay, great. All right, thank you. Thanks for joining us. Sorry to get a little late start here of technical difficulties, still settling into new City Hall over here. This is the Aspen City Council special meeting for March 1st, 2022. That is a call to order. Could we have a roll call for attendance, please?
Councillor Doyle? Here. Councillor Howenstein? Here. Councillor Mesereau?
Present.
Councillor Richards?
Here.
Mayor Tory?
Here as well. Special meeting is called this evening for one item under action items. This is consideration of a resolution number 32, series 2022, contract with Design Workshop. It's important for this council to call a special meeting this evening because time is of the essence when we're dealing with certain contracts, and this is one of them. And we have Philip and Jessica here to talk to us a little bit about it.
Thank you, Mayor Tory and Council. For the record, Philip Sapino, Community Development Director. I'm joined by Jessica Garrow, who is a principal at Design Workshop.
Hello, good to see you.
And Ben Anderson is joining us via WebEx. He is downstairs in the building, but he has a P&Z meeting on an annexation item in 12 minutes. And so I'd like to try and be sensitive with his time. And with that in mind, Ben, do you mind walking us through, at a very high level, the services outlined in the contract?
Good to see you, Mayor and Council. For the record, Ben Anderson, Planner with Community Development. Thanks for allowing the special meeting this evening in consideration of resolution number 32. This is in relationship to a contract with Design Workshop. Design Workshop is our lead consultant support for our response to Ordinance 27 of 2021 that created the emergency moratorium. Design Workshop has an important subcontractor, City Explained Inc. This contract was identified, and these professional services were identified for a few reasons. First, this team has a kind of proven track record of excellence in the planning and public engagement realm. They both have staff who are very familiar with the Aspen development context, which is a complicated place that has some very special qualities that I think we all know and understand. And lastly, they had capacity to jump in with us on the tight time constraints that the moratorium offered. We have been working with Design Workshop and City Explained since January. Previously, 2 smaller contracts have been approved, one for work in January and one for work in February. While we were kind of scoping the full project out with council, since that process of kind of the project scope is completed, we have a fully fleshed out contract, scope of work, fee schedule that's been created. As you have seen in the packet, the full contract is for roughly, or excuse me, the full scope of work, the costs are associated with that are roughly $359,000. In January and February, we've issued 2 previous contracts for roughly $70,000. And the contract that's in front of you tonight to be considered by resolution number 32 is for the balance of that scope of work, which is roughly $289,000. We feel that this is, while it's certainly a significant sum of money, there's a lot of work going into our efforts in response to the moratorium. Primarily, this contract is involved with kind of, project management, keeping us on track and on time. There's significant efforts being given to data analysis, development analysis, code review, making sure that whatever we propose in terms of response is make some sense, consistent with best practices, and most importantly, providing some very significant leadership of our public engagement efforts. And both Design Workshop and City Explains as a subcontractor are leading that and coming up with some really great strategies and tactics for us as we have conversations with our larger community. So with that, we're happy, either myself, Philip, Jessica are here to answer any questions that you might have, but we're certainly recommending support of resolution number 32, and the passage of this contract is important to our continuing to be able to work and meeting the expectations of the timeline for the moratorium. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but certainly this is coming with staff's recommendation of support after some significant work to land on this scope that we think will bring success to our larger process. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Council members, questions? Not really. I guess then I would maybe ask or just put a statement out there and see about reaction. What the nature of this contract, regardless of moratorium, this is work that we want to get done.
I think it's 100% correct, Mayor Tory.
So regardless of what happens with court rulings or whatever's outstanding, this work will go on, and that we will be using these services regardless.
That's correct. It's my expectation that irregardless of the status of Ordinance 27, the work that we've undertaken for the last 3 months and will continue to undertake for the next 3 months is all work that council has asked staff to do, and the work product, again, outside of Ordinance 27, will be something that you want to consider.
Thank you. If there's no questions then, if there's any other statements from the presenters, then I could take a motion. 32.
I would make a motion to approve resolution 32.
I'll second that motion.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
You want to go first?
No, go for it.
We have put this on a timeline. We've committed to the community to try to fulfill that timeline as best as possible. As Tori has referenced, this is significant work towards modifying the code, whether there was a moratorium or not, to bring it more in line with the community plan. I fully support the expenditure. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Skippy?
I would just, say, I have been one to sort of roll my eyes at big consultant contracts, and I'm very supportive of this one. I see this as a clear indication to the community that we are dead serious about the speed we want this work done at and the way we want our community involved. So whether you are somebody who has been at our throats thinking this was the worst idea, or cheering us on, we want you in this process. We're putting our money where our mouth is, and the timeline is short. This is when we're going to co-create the rules that will make it possible for us to have the community that we all want and not sit back and accept the community that we all fear we're losing. And so this is our investment in that, and this is the time for everyone in the community to jump in, and we got a team to do it.
Thanks, Skippy. John?
I just wanted to add that your outreach is already working. I've been approached by several people in the development community about how they can get involved, and it was very easy for me to point them in the right direction, so thanks.
That's good feedback. Thank you very much.
Agreed with that. Very easy and much appreciated.
Excellent.
Great.
Board, any comments?
Only that Design Workshop has proven to be a good working partner and competent, and so I support this.
Thank you. And let me just give a little bit more information about what was just said. Aspen Community Voice. .com is one way that you can lend your voice to this conversation. I also want to say that I'm really happy with the selection of Design Workshop for all the expertise you bring to it, and that you are in this community, you understand this as well as anybody. So it's great to have you working with us, and hopefully the whole community will be working with us as well on this. No further comments then, and we can have a roll call vote for resolution number 32, please.
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Hohenstein?
Yes.
Counselor Mesereau?
Yes.
Counselor Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Tory?
Yes. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good to see
Ben.
you. Appreciate it. And I'm going to do a really quick pitch. We do have a lot of engagement happening next week, starting on Saturday, all the way through Thursday, March 10th, I'm sorry. Pop-up events, neighborhood meetings, focus groups, all of that information's on Aspen Community Voice, so we hope folks come out.
Can we get like a email, something copy pastable that we can send out to people?
Be happy to
Yeah,
provide that.
we can absolutely do that. Great, thank you.
Thank you. That was our agenda item for our special meeting. I would take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the special meeting of 3/1/22. Messed up.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote for adjournment?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Howenstein,
Yes.
Counselor Mazzaro,
Yes.
Counselor Richards,
Yes.
Mayor Tory.
Yes. All right. That's our special meeting. I'm getting some different messages up here on my computer at this time, so I'm going to check in before we start this work session. My message here says that WebEx, either I got disconnected or it got disconnected. I don't know.
This is Shannon. The WebEx is still going. You are not on the list. So you were disconnected.
Which it is optional for council members to sign into WebEx. It is a convenience, not a requirement
Yeah.
because of the broadcasting system, particularly because there's not public, as my understanding is that there's not public comment being taken tonight, that doesn't need to be moderated for that purpose. And the room feed will be maintained as long as Grassroots maintains an internet connection.
I can get my computer too. I used it for the first few and then I dropped it because I thought we were all running normally, but if it helps to have it, I'm happy to have it every meeting.
No, I think that's what we're saying.
I'm trying to
don't-
politely say you don't need to do it.
We don't,
Okay.
we don't need it, and I don't even need it except to just keep an eye on what's going on. But, yeah, I think I'm getting kicked out of the network again. All right, well, let's go ahead, and I'll keep working on this a little bit, but let's go ahead and start our work session topic.
Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, I'm going to go downstairs and multitask, but I will be listening throughout
Make sure you bring that with.
I am going to go downstairs and multitask, but I will be listening in throughout the meeting. And if there's any questions, just
Nod to you. Okay, will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Screen Jim.
All right, so this is not working. Let me go. So,
I think that's like the fastest we've ever spent, almost $300,000.
I don't know.
No,
Somebody did it faster.
it's like 14
I heard
minutes.
somebody bought a car and
connected and
gone
secure,
for it.
okay.
That just happened. I just heard that 5 minutes ago.
Enter.
Great point.
Don't forget where you are.
Great point. That's funny.
Let's go.
True.
Yeah,
Are we there?
yep.
Excellent.
I mean, I'm not, but I will be.
Thank you, Mayor Tory and Council. Again, Philip Supino, Community Development Director. I have a slideshow, a slide deck to share. May I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Thank you. All right.
I'm back.
So we are here this evening to check in on short-term rental policy direction. And your memo will mirror the presentation that I will make this evening. This is one in a series of conversations that we've had about short-term rentals going back to the fall of 2019, which is when we started discussing the Muni Revs system, which finance put in place to better track not only permitting but tax compliance of short-term rentals in town. Subsequent to that, we've had a number of work sessions, the exact numbers escaping me at this time, discussing the findings from the work with the Muni Revs, the implementation of the Muni Rev system, discussing the status of permitting and tax remittance, and ultimately having a very policy-focused discussion on November 16th of last year which contributed in large part to, I believe, council's consideration or desire to consider Ordinance 27. And subsequent to that work session and the adoption of Ordinance 24, which, if you remember, was a standalone ordinance about 2022 short-term rental permits, we have begun working in earnest on developing regulatory responses under the cover of the moratorium to council's policy statements over the years about short-term rentals. And with respect to timing, I will point out, so this is obviously a sort of oversimplified version of our work plan for the next few months under Ordinance 27. Ordinance 24, which was also passed by council, extended existing short-term rental permits to September 30th of 2022. I want to highlight that for everybody and remind council of that action, because while we are working to adopt new regulations as diligently as possible and in concert with the rest of the moratorium work, there is a larger window for this work to be conducted than some of the other moratorium work that's specific to Ordinance 27. So again, we're very much focused on getting all this done prior to the June 8th moratorium sort of deadline, if you will, primarily because it will take time to implement whatever regulations, subsequent program might be required to support those new regulations. And the summer in between adoption and September 30th will be good time for us to do that work. However, I would note that Ordinance 24 creates that sort of larger grace period. I understand it's a few dates to remember, but I wanted to highlight that because we haven't had that discussion in a while. So you can see again from this very oversimplified graphic on the screen, February is over. We are in March as of today. We are at the March 1st work session discussing short-term rental policy. You'll be seeing myself, Ben Anderson, Garrett Larimer, Haley Hart, and the Design Workshop and City Explain teams, perhaps more than you'd like to for the next 2 months. But these are critical months for us. And the types of discussions we're having here tonight and have at these subsequently scheduled work sessions and regular meetings are absolutely essential to ensuring that when ordinances are ultimately delivered to council for your consideration, they are commensurate with your expectations. They are aligned with the feedback we've received from the community and from the work that we've received from our consultants to date. So these types of conversations, which are fairly detailed at times, are, again, very important to our success. I would remind you, just briefly, these are 4 constraints that we have highlighted in every moratorium work session we've had since the first of the year. These are the 4 constraints to this process as staff sees them, and they are essential to understanding how we are doing our work, how we are scoping, what needs to happen and in what order with respect to our June 8th deadline. And how we're working with your constituents, the public, the residents, and interested parties here in the city of Aspen. And these are wicked problems. As we've gotten deeper into some of these topics, the complexity, the interrelatedness of a lot of these topics is something that I won't say we've underestimated, but it serves to highlight again how complex these are, and it is staff's charge to present to you solutions that are as sort of simple and easy to understand as possible, and that's the work we're doing right now. Some of the ideas that are shaping our thinking about the work that we're doing, things that will have the most direct effect, and again, we've discussed this in previous work sessions. Based upon the problem statements in Ordinance 27, what are those code amendments? What are those policies that will most directly influence the problem statements the council identified in Ordinance 27. Let's do a few things well, as opposed to trying to solve all the problems at once, which we know is sort of Sisyphean and ineffective. Let's be effective and do a few things really well, and we're focused on that. Make sure the work we're doing requires the protection of a moratorium. I think we will find ourselves as we move deeper into this process that we will identify possible regulatory changes that council favors that do not require the protection of a moratorium for us to effectively pursue. And given the constraints of time, the wickedness of the problem, and some of the conflicting views in the community, it may be staff's recommendation that we take some things off the table. And I just want to put that out there as a potential strategy that will ensure the effectiveness of the process for you and your expectations. And again, to the next bullet point, maybe some things can wait. And we want to make sure we have realistic expectations for the community and their ability to plug into the work that we're doing, for staff and their ability to deliver work product that meets all these other sort of guiding principles, for council in your ability to absorb the amount of information you're going to be presented with and feel supported in making decisions on those things in a space with the information that you need to do so. This evening, 3 sort of primary objectives: to arrive at a shared understanding of the scope of short-term rental amendments which you desire, and this is a big milestone, this conversation tonight. Clear direction to staff from council on those items included in your memo, and again, the presentation tonight will mirror that content, and then agreement on next steps on code amendments. Anything on that before I get into the thrust of the presentation this evening? Councilmember Howenstein.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. I had a little point of clarification. I thought ordinance 26 was the STRs that we looked at in the 7th, and that ordinance had September 30th, 2022 for the issuance or the continuance of 2021, and then ordinance 27 was May. So I want to just be clear what the end date is for the STRs.
So you're correct, it's ordinance 26. Ordinance 24 was yet another ordinance drafted by my staff in the fall, considered by council in the fall. Thank you for that clarification. September 30th, 2022 is the date for the issuance of new short-term rental permits, September 30th, 2022.
Okay, did we amend that in the approval of 27, because 27 says May?
So 27 will expire, the moratorium will expire, and we will be left with the code amendment that was codified by ordinance 26.
Okay, did we have a second reading on 26? I know we had a first reading on the 12th.
We did have a second reading
Okay.
on 26, yes, sir.
Thank
And
you.
Thank you for clarifying all that. I apologize for the lack of clarity in my discussion. So a little bit of a guidepost for the presentation this evening. This is oversimplified, but I felt like it might be an effective tool to convey some information to council as we move through the material. There are sort of 3 levels of difficulty here in the types of regulations that we will walk through in the presentation this evening and that are contained in your memo: easy, moderate, and hard. And generally speaking, those things which staff considers to be easy are very much administrative focused. There is a legal precedent, a regulatory precedent for doing this thing. It would be relatively uncontentious in the eyes of the public, be they sort of impacted stakeholders or your average citizen. They may not require additional staffing or resources. These are very straightforward modifications to our existing regulations. Something that I would classify as moderately difficult. There's certainly a legal precedent. They're relatively uncontentious, but maybe they up the ante a little bit insofar as it's a big step forward relative to the program we have in place today. It might require additional staffing or financial resources, and it would certainly increase the regulatory obligation for short-term rental operators in the community. And then there's things that are going to be objectively hard, more difficult, right? Most difficult. I went back and forth about whether or not to use the ski runs thing, but these colors are brand compliant. Okay. So I went with the City of Aspen brand guidelines over skiing, which is not in my nature, but that's what I did. A hard thing would require a nexus study, right? This would be a new fee. This could be an impact fee or a significant permit fee. It might require a public vote. Maybe council decides that changes to our tax regulations are appropriate, and those by Tabor have to go to voters. One might expect legal challenges from some of these regulatory options. There would be increased cost, not only to short-term rental operators and owners, to the city to administer these programs, to run a public vote process, et cetera. This would increase the regulatory burden to the industry. people who manage or own or host short-term rentals would feel these changes in a major way in how they do business. And it would result in increased staffing and financial resource needs for the city in order to properly administer. So you'll see these colors throughout the presentation, and that's what those colors are implying, and we can get into the details on that on any particular issue as we arrive at it. And these, just a reminder, are the problem statements. These are truncated versions of the problem statements that council consented to, supported in our January work session when we first started introducing to council how staff was thinking about some of these topics. And these are written in greater detail both in your memo as well as in the presentation this evening. And these are from the last short-term rental discussion we had. This is a high-level outline of the different types of regulatory categories that some of the responses fall into: life safety, permitting, operational standards, enforcement, financials, and zoning. And I have graded those on level of difficulty for you so that you can get a sense of how staff is thinking about the relationship between sort of the outcome that council might favor in terms of how the community experiences these changes and how modified regulations might affect the industry, and the level of difficulty associated with them. So unless there are questions on the extensive introductory material, I'll start walking you through the problem statements and some of the material in the memo.
Does it matter to you what buckets on the last slide things are in? Like let's just say I'm going to support everything. Does it matter what color they are for you?
Certainly not. No, okay. No. The colors are merely meant to convey a sort of statement from staff about our perception of the level of difficulty. But there certainly would be nothing about that should prevent you from favoring one option or another. But we do want to convey, the difference between using zone district standards to control the location and number of short-term rentals in town is fundamentally different than requiring life safety inspections, right? Those are on the spectrum, those are very far apart, right?
Yep, got it. Okay, I was, from an operator standpoint, I think some of those might be in different categories, but it just doesn't matter.
Understood, and that kind of feedback is going to be very helpful for us in understanding our perception of difficulty, our perception of contentiousness, et cetera. So we would welcome that feedback. Cool. So again, problem statement off the top. I won't bother repeating it, but this is again in line with the contents in the memo. Defining short-term rentals. There is a definition of short-term rental in the land use code. It simply defines it as the short-term, i.e., 30-day or less occupancy of a residential structure. There are communities in Colorado and around the country that have taken different approaches to defining short-term rentals. And what staff is driving at here is about defining them as a land use. This is different than as a defined term in the land use code. A defined land use is, grocery store, and that can only be located in certain places in the community. And so by placing a definition around it, it then would nest with any zoning-based approach that council might favor in terms of controlling location, number, et cetera. And so consenting to or directing staff to define this as a land use doesn't necessarily direct staff to amend the land use code to restrict where it can be. This would simply be adding it as a defined term in the land use code that has a consequence in zoning, that we would then have to amend the zoning code to include this as a permitted or conditional or prohibited use in any of the relevant zone districts in town. So any discussion about that or clarifying questions?
Yeah. Right now, our short-term rental permit, I think, goes by another name.
Correct. It's called a vacation rental permit. And this lack of terminology alignment, this misalignment between terminology is something we will fix with the ordinance that council will consider.
Okay. Thank you. Ward?
Yeah, Philip, are you asking for approval for different zone districts at this point?
Not specific zone districts, no. Simply the idea that this should be a defined use in the land use code, which we could use zoning to then control in some way.
Yeah, some of the factors that I had jotted down here from other communities are what conditions, density, number of rentals per year, minimum days to rent, and proximity, like proximity to other public things, or schools or transportation. So those are matrices that I would like to see used in the definition of a zone district.
And having it as a defined land use will allow us to get at some of that information.
Makes sense.
I support that. I think that that's a necessary first step. I would kind of wonder whether there's a STR type A and a STR type B, particularly those who have a front desk and have staff on site on the location. I think of us very different from the scattered site, non-management on-site type locations. So happy to support this, but I think it'd be very hard to get a singular definition that then is appropriate to the various zoning codes and things like that.
I think that's a very astute observation and something that will be a challenge for us. And that concept of distributed versus sort of concentrated short-term rentals and how that relates to a specific property or a zone district is absolutely work that we're sort of involved in right now.
Thank you.
Skippy?
I just want to clarify, so when I was reading the packet, just in terms of your expectations of us, I read it as you're looking for sort of the initial sign-off on like, yes, I think this is a hole worth digging, but not the final determination. So this one's kind of like either it is or isn't, but
100%.
Others are, okay, so just making sure.
Yeah, like yes, go down this rabbit hole, staff,
Right.
figure this out
Or
and come
don't.
back with some options, or no, we don't have any interest in touching this. That's the level of feedback that would be very helpful to me this evening.
Got it, okay, so yes, down this rabbit hole, and just, Rachel, to your point, I think it's worth looking at all that, but I think we need to be mindful to not build a system for the way things operated previously as opposed to how they will operate in the future. There are distinctions to operations, but, if you think of the places, not all of them, I can't tell you what the Gantt does, right, because they have on-site, but I know if you go into Foshing House, a variety of their Frias places, for instance, they've got offices there, but those offices are closed on weekends and evenings. So they don't actually operate much different than having someone on site. So I just want to be mindful of the operation actually happening with the eye to not sort of propping up the higher cost items and hurting the lower cost items, which contribute, I think, positively to the diversity of our bed base, if that makes sense.
I don't know that I agree, but we're all just putting out what we.
Yeah. I just want to, I agree that staff should be looking at all that and getting it right, but I just want to be mindful of that as well.
If I may skip you just for clarification, you're suggesting that different types of operations have different types of vacation rental permits or STR permits or whatever vernacular we use?
What I heard Rachel say is that we might consider sort of different types of STRs. One for, and correct me if I'm wrong, one for STRs, like let's say call it the Gantt, something we all know, where you have a condo hotel model, you have an on-site office, and you have on-site staff, versus one that is a distributed model. I guess Aspen Vacation Rentals or luxury vacation rentals, where the properties are scattered about, and the person who's on call, which may be 24/7 in some cases and not in others, is moving between properties. And so she was suggesting there'd be a difference there. Is that right?
I think that at some level, management has come up as one of the issues.
Yeah.
And I think that there will be different types of management, and perhaps that will lead to different STRs. And I think that that's all I was saying, is that there may be, we got CC1 and CC2. We have different zone districts that have different allowances in them, and it may be appropriate when we get to that point to have different allowances for different types of STRs. I just want to leave that door open.
Yep, and what I was adding to that, which is I agree that we need to look at that, but we need to be mindful of the more kind of fluid nature of it. So there will be, an apartment complex with an on-site office that's, closed weekends and evenings. There'll be another where there's 24/7 on site. And in the distributed, there's going to be one where someone's on call, 24/7, 365, and others where there's one person in Florida who doesn't pick up their phone. So it's just.
Yeah, I understood what you said, and I think I also understand what Rachel says, and I agree with both of you that not all STRs are created equally. and that there should be different types of, perhaps different types of permits, and I sense that this is where the road we're going to be going down.
Precisely. And so again, just the direction that you'd like us to explore this will allow us to come back to you with more granular information on these distinctions, because it gets technical fast, so.
Yes. Yes.
I support moving forward with the land use code
Yes.
exploration.
And not to be over clear, but you can't help over communicating. I guess my biggest fear in that is that the sort of like local who rents out a bedroom gets pushed in with the non-on-site management and has a series of rules that are designed to make that harder to do, which reduces our sort of last affordable community integrated lodging. That's my biggest fear.
We'll get to those types of distinctions in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you so much. So, again, sort of same, different problem statement number 2. First possible response is the use of a permit fee. I apologize for the crudeness of this map. This presentation was crafted under duress, but this is intended to convey that there are a number, approximately a dozen communities in the state of Colorado alone that have a permit fee associated with short-term rentals, and I should qualify that by saying this is based on CAST data. So there are non-Colorado Association of Ski Town communities that have permit fees as well. The CAST studies to date, along with a couple other best practices studies, have been the basis of a lot of staff research to this point, and so you'll see that come up again and again. Permit fees assist in mitigating community impacts, and they cover program costs, right? I mean, that's primarily why we charge a building permit fee, or it helps cover administrative costs, and it is a statement that the community has assessed that there's a relationship between an economic activity in town and a cost to the community in supporting that economic activity. And presently, vacation rental permits, short-term rental permits, do not have a fee attached to them in town. There's, in your exhibits, in the CAST study, it shows the range of permit fees assessed in the state of Colorado, and it ranges from $50 to, I believe, $750 in the communities shown here in the map. And so it is staff's recommendation at this point that we use the consultants that we have in place to help us assess what an appropriate permit fee would look like based upon a wide range of factors in town.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, just a thumbs up. Rachel?
I'm a thumbs up for yes, but I want to drill down a little about how, I mean, the permit fee is a one-time fee, and that's for someone to be able to use it as it allows for a full year.
So to clarify, we don't know, because we haven't done the
Okay.
Nexus study, and we don't know how the fee would be structured. Typically, a permit fee is assessed when a permit is issued, and there are a number of communities that require annual permit renewal.
Yeah.
And so
No,
the
well,
permit fee would be assessed annually.
That I was getting to that it's a one-time fee annually, but it's not a fee per rental throughout the year, quite obviously. So how to assess what that one-time fee should be and how does it mitigate its impacts, I think is something I want to be able to see. If we're saying it's $750 and that 6-bedroom, 6-bath house is generating guests 40 weeks out of the year, you'd start to say, well, wait a second, how much employee demand did that create that's not mitigated by a $750 fee a year? And how many years would we have to rent that unit before we could build one studio with that money?
So
that's what I'm kind of looking
Sure.
towards, how we assess that fee. And even if we end up with a fee that says $500 is the magic number, I want to be able to tell the public, but that short-term rental is driving the demand for 3 new employees. How are you going to help us pay to build those?
Sure. As staff has conceived this to this point, the permit fee would be distinct from any what I'll call
Mitigation.
impact fee.
Okay.
And it could be an impact fee associated with affordable housing mitigation that is run, and so the memo makes a distinction between these different fees. I'll walk through that distinction in my presentation. So
So this is
we will-
just about
this
being
is just about
commensurate
the
with the
administ-
enforcement mechanism we will need and the administration.
that's correct.
Well, just commensurate with costs then,
Yep,
is,
okay.
is my usual standard on that. And any other, how, overhead that we charge to departments, so that's
Yep.
fully covered.
That actually raises one question for me. Does staff yet have a thought on how this would be allocated? So if the number's $1 million and there's 1 million STRs, are we thinking everyone pays $1, or that there'll be a progressive scale based on the size of the unit, say?
That's work that we need to do.
Okay.
There's, just based on the CAST studies, there are flat permit fees. There are permit fees assessed on number of bedrooms. There are permit fees in out-of-state that I'm aware of that are assessed on nightly rental rate. There's a lot of different ways to get at it, and council will be presented with options and the studies to back those options up.
Got it. So I'll look forward to your options, but definitely put me down in the progressive camp. Something that's renting out for $200,000 for a weekend should not pay the same fee as a place renting for $99 a night.
Understood.
And like, that is our range. Like, that's a crazy
Yeah,
range.
understood.
Ward?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in line with what Skippy and Rachel are saying, that, the previous comments, that not all STRs are the same. And so I'm envisioning a tiered fee structure, however that might be determined, whether it's by how many days a year, how close it is to the core, the impacts on the neighborhood. Both of these are talking about impacts. So a low impact rental for a weekend has a different impact on the neighborhood than something that's requiring daily maid service for a week or two. So I don't know if it's possible to just put this bug in your ear about a tiered fee and have the determinations by the impacts that it creates, whether it's employee generation, transportation, the price for fees or services that are required, but some kind of a tiered, so not all are the same.
Yep, understood.
John, and then Rachel, if I could.
So I didn't really realize this until we really passed the moratorium, but where I live, I'm literally surrounded by STRs. There's one behind my building, there's one on the side, and there's one across the street. And what I've noticed is the people who rent long-term are less of a problem. Let me rephrase that. The people that are there for a week or two or three are less of a problem than the people that show up for a weekend, leave, another group comes in for a weekend, they leave, another group comes in.
Yeah.
Half of those people will not bother to figure out the difference between a recycling container and a trash container. Another thing I noticed, this is just random, but the higher permit fees off the CAST information were in non-ski towns. I mean, ski towns, yes, but Salida, Glenwood, Grand Lake, and Durango had the higher permit fees. I found that interesting. Anyway, I
Just
also...
on that concept for a moment, because I think it's instructive to some of the work that staff will be doing. There are two primary ways that communities consider short-term rentals. One is as a housing matter, and the other is as a lodging matter. And communities that have been historically over the last 10 years concerned primarily about the relationship between short-term rentals and housing have used higher permit fees as a greater barrier to entry for people to decide to short-term versus long-term their properties. This is different than the lodging consideration, where there might be a greater desire to use a lower permit fee as a way to cover administrative costs while not necessarily creating the same barrier to entry.
Understood. I also agree that I think some type of tiered mechanism would be the equitable way to go.
Thanks, John. Rachel?
Yeah, I think Ward raises a good point. I think we'd all have different versions of what tiers or what they should be based on, and you'll be bringing it back to us. But it really kind of raises the question for me of how do we then use those dollars to mitigate those impacts? You know, you can't collect mitigation fees without putting it into housing if it's a housing mitigation fee. And so if these are mitigation fees, when we get to that point about the transportation impacts or the fact they don't recycle or whatever it is, how are we planning on employing those fees in a way that mitigate those impacts in the neighborhoods? Thank you.
Hey, just one more comment. Traditionally, all of our, what we're calling condotels, have been the bed base for Aspen. We used to call them hotbeds, and now we're calling them STRs. And I would like to see those continue, be grandfathered in, and I see them as having just at first thought that those fees should probably be lower or minimum because it's a well-established use, and the community needs them.
Thank you.
Scrunchy.
I did scrunch on that.
Not sure how to annotate that, but I'll make a mental note.
MEH.
Sticking with the same problem statement, getting to a higher level of difficulty and contentiousness, the idea of modification of or the creation of a new tax. So the range of lodging taxes assessed in the CAS studies is approximately 2 to 4%. That would, again, modification of Aspen's 2% lodgers tax would require a public vote. The addition of a distinct short-term rental tax, which has been done in some of the communities in the study. That short-term rental tax ranges from 2 to 7.5%. There's also an excise tax, which is assessed on short-term rentals in, I believe, Grand Lake. And that excise tax functions differently than a lodger's tax insofar as the revenue received has to be dedicated towards very specific purposes as described in the legislation, and again also requires a Tabor vote.
Skippy.
Is the variety of taxes, are they just a percentage of rents?
I don't have that level of detail
Okay.
right now.
Yes is my answer.
My initial reaction is no. I would like to approach this from fees, very targeted through fees instead of through a tax.
And I would just note in response to that fees are the more common way to generate the revenue needed to offset impacts to the community and cover.
I need to be convinced that
the admin costs.
a tax is the way to go.
Yeah, you know, part of, it's not a problem, but part of when we pull this apart piece by piece, you know that other pieces are going to be related in the future. So it's hard to say, yes, I'm for a tax if it's maybe mitigation fees are really where it's going to lie. A tax on the one hand is just automatically passed on to the consumer. I have a feeling it would raise an awful lot more than any mitigation fee we're going to be able to put on short-term rentals. And I'm sitting here trying to think of what was the number that Peter Strucker had come up at the end of the year that was generated from short-term rentals. And now, of course, we're not cutting that into the management, non-management buckets. But I think it'd be good for council to get a sense of what even something smaller would do. And again, part of me is particularly how do you mitigate that transportation impact to those neighborhoods that don't have buses or shuttles now? Or how do you mitigate anything? And how do you build the housing for the new housing demand? So it'd be nice to have some sense of what if there was a 1% short-term rental tax on things not located within our core, or some things like this. I just don't know. It would have to be a public vote. I understand that. But again, the public needs to, in my mind, understand what our options are as much as we do. And so having what some of these things may or may not generate would make a difference.
Yeah, understood.
So, Rachel, and are you looking for preference here between the two?
You know, not really. What What direction on this would help staff understand is if there's a majority of council who wants more information about this, we can put together a package of information for council to consider the timing, the cost for running the public vote, the potential revenue under different taxing scenarios.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate it. I'm supportive of more information. I kind of see this as an avenue that I find us likely to be going down. Interesting that Frisco, they have spring elections in April, and they will be, Frisco will be putting a 5% excise tax in front of their voters. Rachel, you got an extra mask piece.
Here, I know, it's falling apart. I'll take care of it in a second, thank you. But just on that, I really appreciate that. What I'm wondering is, we could find out, are the other communities' lodging taxes all going to marketing, Chamber of Commerce type things, or any of these other lodging taxes being dedicated by the community towards housing or transportation?
Housing.
Yeah, let's, no, the existing ones, because, I mean, we have, what do we have, a 1.5% bed tax already? I'd be more interested in the distinct STR tax myself.
Yeah.
Than a lodging tax, but also to know what do people really do with their existing lodging tax? Because I certainly know that's come up as a question of, well, why not the chamber starting to build housing? Or why aren't any of these other entities using their budget that come from taxes for the bigger need? And I'd like to know.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks. So there's some support for more information. Ward was shying away a little bit. John?
More information. I think this is an avenue where needs to be explored.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, need to be convinced, and more information might help me get there.
Sounds good. Rachel referenced 1.5. Is it 2.0 lodging?
I think that's what I read.
It might be two, I just can't remember.
Yeah, it's
Went up in increments. The first one, half of it went to transportation, half to ACRA. The second one was a full penny to ACRA. So that's why they receive 1.5.
1.5 that
The
direction.
other half goes
And
transportation.
0.5 the other direction.
That's it.
Okay,
That's what it is.
thanks.
Nailed it, Sarah.
Yes.
Okay, so we will put together a report for council on tax options. Impact fees. So again, these are distinct from taxes, these are distinct from permit fees. Highest level of difficulty here insofar as you need a nexus study, and it has to be assessed at some moment, and that would not be at permitting. We're not aware at this time of an impact fee that is assessed on short-term rentals. And as staff has considered this, we have sort of, it is our belief that the growth management quota system and our land use application process would be the means to assess an impact fee. And we would tie it to the potential of creating an allotment for short-term rentals as distinct from a residential allotment or a commercial allotment. We could, again, use our land use application and building permitting systems to get at the relationship between development activities and short-term rentals. In staff's view, if I can make a recommendation here, this would be a heavy lift, and this would be sort of the least legally clear path that we could go down towards figuring out how to make sure that we are offsetting short-term rental impacts to the community in those different areas that I think Rachel has articulately described and some other council members have described this evening. But this is something we could consider, and again, because we have the growth management system in place is why staff's suggesting this is a possible option, but this is something that sort of makes us the most nervous.
Thoughts? Yeah, Skippy.
Sure. No, I appreciate you thinking about this. I'm definitely open to exploring this more. The fact that it's difficult does not give me heartburn. We didn't get into this to do easy stuff. And we should be mindful of, our time. So I'll follow staff in your opinion on this. But, somewhere in here, we need to draw the nexus between the impact in increased jobs, but also in the displacement of people from living in these places. And so seeing the GMQS there, when I read the packet, made me feel like, well, maybe this is the place to figure that out.
That's our assessment as well.
Yeah. So in that, I want a solution to that, and I want to look at that, and I will leave it to staff to determine, the level of difficulty, but no interest in shying away because it's hard.
Yeah, I support this. I think the first bullet point was community impacts, and this is community impacts for employee generation. I would lump those all together. I don't know if we want to have a separate fee just for what is determined to be employee generation, but the impacts I see, there's multiple impacts on the community. Employee generation is just one of those impacts.
John?
Yeah, again, I think this should be explored too, especially because of the known impacts of STRs on employee generation. I also will, like Skippy, follow what staff recommends, but I don't think it should be taken off the table.
Understood.
Thanks.
Well, I just got my newest weekly letter from Vacasa that I can just sign up and get easy, free local management from them. National company. I get a little tired of seeing those and what it's done to our community. And I think we have to think about the employee generation a little more broadly than I have. To begin with, I was thinking, as we've heard, that these are kind of pulling away employees from traditional jobs in the core, whether it's housekeeping or cooking or maintenance or anything like that, and how difficult it is to get employees for servicing the home. But what also we're seeing is that when a home is now occupied far more often and it's 6 or 8 bedrooms, you may have to get an extra line cook to service that need. You may have to get an extra waiter. You might need an extra bar back. You might need, so the employment demand is within the core is where it's happening. When you say, we were always a balanced community at some level for bed base and retail, the amount of commercial space, the services offered. And now we're bed base going way up here, and number of guests way up here. But the core isn't any larger, and the restaurants who are trying to pump it out and keep it up, they're having to get more employees to deal with the over-tourism we're facing. So I have a hard time that we're going to potentially double our bed base and see the county double the bed base, but there's not going to be impact fees that will help us address any of those impacts. That's my concern. I realize others might feel differently about it. The other thing that is about it is I still come back to I want to be able to tell the public that what we're doing with this STR regulation, whatever it ends up being, is going to legitimize how many beds. We are creating 1,000 hotbeds, 2,000 hotbeds, 3,000 hotbeds, and how much employees do we think we need to now service those in the restaurants, on the buses, everywhere else where they need service. I just don't want this to be seem like we're shooting darts at a blackboard because we don't have that information. And again, even if we decide, okay, well, those are too big of fees, the market's just going to run, we should be able to tell the public what it's doing to our town. And I'll take one last minute, because I've been holding on to this one for a while. The Dunbar Ranch residence, 12 bedrooms, 13 baths, sleeps 34, available weekly, monthly, and for private events, right up Independence Pass. Now, how many housing units do you think that ever mitigated for under the county codes when it was approved? I remember when it was a big deal about up at Ashcroft, the lodge, and was the lodge. And now we've got an unpermitted lodge, daily, weekly, special event rentals. And if it sleeps 35, I imagine it's going to take a goodly number of employees to keep it in shape. That's what I'm worried about. And that's what I want to be able to answer to our community, whether they take action through STR, whether they take action in future years. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's, it's
Kevin Costner's.
Yeah.
We're watching Dancing with Wolves recently. I think that's precisely right, and I'm really glad I had over-tourism at the top of my page, because in the kind of initial problem statements, that was the one thing that wasn't there. And from the beginning, we've talked about the three problems: community impact, housing impact, and over-tourism. And I think we need to be mindful of that. What does over-tourism look like? ACRA just released that great survey. I think there's great work that we can plug into there, but is over-tourism 10% more than our busiest Christmas ever? Is it 10% less? I think we should find some number that we can justify for the community, and then look at, well, what are our existing hotbeds in the Lodge district? What are the ones that are approved that we know are coming? And what's sort of the remainder? And then work back from there. Because this should not be about, as you said, should not be about our lodging base is going to double, and so we need to deal with that. It should be like, well, let's not let it double if that's going to be terrible for the community.
Yeah. Just thank you for that, Skippy. Along those lines, that's why I really want to start talking about number of beds we're creating rather than number of STR permits.
Yeah.
Or if it's a permit for how many beds.
Sure.
I just want to know how many people we're bringing in, because the real thing comes back to compliance with the community plan. The community plan had numbers that we were supposed to be able to have as a carrying capacity, including residents and guests. And I think we're just shooting way beyond any of that.
So I feel like I need to do a little expectation management here as we're starting to talk about number of beds. We do not at present have access to that information.
Yeah.
And we will not have access to that information during the moratorium process. That is a level of detail about, that is a level of market analysis that at least with our current program,
Yeah.
we're not equipped to engage in. And that, in my estimation, would be a much larger effort. I certainly hear you about the need to engage in the effort and how beds relates to an impact fee. Again, I completely understand where council would like to go here. Our ability to assess an impact fee on anything other than somebody who's looking for a growth management allotment, right, which is development activity. I'm not aware of a community that has determined it has an ability to do that. So what I'm hearing described is a scope a couple orders of magnitude bigger than I feel like we have the capacity to engage in the next few months.
Yeah.
And would require a lot more focused work by staff and council over a longer timeline to figure out if we can do that.
I will accept that, Philip, and maybe you can think about it some more, but I would guess I was kind of thinking that if we look at the X many permits that were issued for this year that are active, and perhaps contract with someone, but through the real estate listings in the assessor's office, it should say how many bedrooms are in each of those
Certainly,
units.
and what we're hearing very clearly from the technical stakeholder group that we've assembled to help us work through this, who are industry people, and what we hear consistently in our sort of community engagement more broadly, is that data, or the data that the city has presently, is insufficient for us to regulate with at this time. I'm not suggesting we can't get better data,
Yeah.
but what we have access to right now, we're hearing, is insufficient to form a sort of really robust regulatory basis with the sort of nexus you're describing, with a significant impact fee and sort of employee generation numbers. That's, again, a couple orders of magnitude larger than we have the capacity for right now, and then we can accomplish with the data that we have.
Sorry, Philip, who's saying that that's insufficient data?
So we have, through our community engagement efforts so far, which includes what I'm calling a sort of technical advisory committee, right? These are industry people. They have seen some of the city's data and are suggesting to us that we don't have a good enough sense of what's actually out there in the market in order to make that level of assessment of the relationship between beds and employee generation.
Yeah, I
for
mean,
example.
respectfully, I would agree with them that we cannot determinately say how many beds. You don't know if I've put 5 bunk beds in my studio and I'm renting them out, right? Like, clearly that is not the case. But we do have assessors data. We know how many bedrooms there are in this community, and we know how many people roughly are coming here. And we have a seat of the pants feel for what feels good. And maybe right now we're at the Goldilocks zone. Maybe this Christmas was perfect. I doubt there's many people who are going to tell you that, but we have some some sense of an approximation of what we want to aim at, and to look at how many beds are available in traditional lodging and look at how many bedrooms are available in the community and walk that back to a not precise but good enough target to decide how many STR permits we want to put out there, knowing the average bedroom count, I think is totally legitimate. And I think if we want perfect data on the number of bunk beds, then we will never get to a number. And we shouldn't expect it to be perfect from the beginning, but we should expect to start managing it.
When we speak with our consultants about impact fees, good enough doesn't get them.
But it-
Sorry,
important.
let me walk back.
So,
I'm not suggesting that the impact fee, that number would work legally. What I'm saying is when we're thinking about overall, sort of what we want to cap the number of STR permits at, we can look at that stuff.
If I could, I accept what you're saying, Philip, and I can understand that. I guess part of my interest is to be able to present to the community what we're doing or not. And when this ordinance is passed and there's 500 new permits beyond what we have now, can we tell them we've decided to invite in 1,000 more people for next 4th of July weekend or no? And to me, it's going to be about whether the public will stand up for this ordinance once it's passed after the fact, because it can be referred and initiated just like the emergency ordinance was. And I see that 14 months from now, there'll be a new council elected. And if they don't understand why we did what we did with the STRs, or what the magnitude and the impact to the community is of not dealing with it, I think it won't be a very good community conversation. I think that's what I'm looking for. But I agree with what Skippy has said and what you're saying, that I don't believe it'd be the basis for a legal nexus to do an impact fee. But what you're also kind of essentially telling us is that it's going to be too hard, and for a lot of reasons, to get to an impact fee. So the really only impact way of capturing and mitigate is going to be a tax. I mean, we're going to have the administrative fee that'll cover our costs and maybe enforcement, but if it's going to be too difficult to get to an impact fee for the actual impacts, we'll have to have a rough guess of the impact and ask the public for a tax to pay for those impacts.
As staff has conceived of this would be tied to development activities.
Right.
Which is distinct from short-term rental permitting, which is distinct from taxing,
But
right?
how do we tell-
And other communities' approach to this point tells me they have assessed that a tax, in addition to potentially a permit fee, are the most direct ways to get at the revenue needed to mitigate community impacts and cover administrative costs for a program.
Okay, well, that's very clear. That's what the conclusion comes back to. I appreciate that, but again, I think that when you're going to go pass a tax, you need to be able to tell the public what is the impact and why that we are going to have another 3,000 people in town at every holiday season.
Understood.
Okay,
Mayor
thank
Tory,
you.
I haven't heard from you yet on this particular topic, and I was wondering if you had any comments on this.
When it comes to just support and wanting more information, I don't want to take anything off the table. So for me right now, there's nothing that I'm going to say, hey, I don't want to learn more about that. In this particular one, my question really is about getting towards some of the information that Rachel's alluding to. That's something that I would assume, if we just talk about bedroom counts, that's something we could get to, as we either start issuing new permits, et cetera. We could also just have somebody hired that just went in and looked at that by looking at listings, et cetera, and putting all that together.
Our ability to get at more granular data about short-term rentals in town will go up considerably.
Yeah.
When a new permitting system is put in place.
Yes. So for me, that's where this is evolving, and because I do agree that getting down to kind of a bedroom count is when you're talking about the impacts from different types of rentals, I think is important. That's probably the best nexus and the best.
Not all the 35
You know what I mean?
people.
Yeah, because there's a big difference here going on. So anyway, I'm supportive of more information. I understand the limitations that you're describing. So I guess this isn't high on my list from the other things that we've already talked about, but I'm still supportive just because I want to know as much as possible.
Perfect.
And I really, from the research that we've done and everything that we've been shared by other communities, it's really seemed, it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not just one avenue of trying to mitigate for the impacts or get the best results for their community. So I see us as probably implementing a couple of different tools here. So I'm in support.
Can I ask a follow-up question? I apologize, I got a little sidetracked on the over-tourism thing and a little off your specific question, but on the impact fee, if what we're looking to ascribe that impact to is additional job creation and displacement of local workforce, and it happened at development, can it be done in such a way that, when old house gets demolished and new house gets built, the fee is only assessed if that new place becomes an STR use through permitting, so that if it's lived in, then it's not.
That's how we've
That's how-
conceived of
okay,
it
so I
to this point. Yes.
Very much want to pursue that.
Yes.
Done with this one. Ward, comments on this item? Did you already get enough input there? Did you get
If there's additional comments, of course, but I felt like I got sufficient direction
And
on the
my
last question.
additional comment is, I think that Rachel's looking for important information, but I see that as a reach beyond the moratorium and using this data that we're collecting during this moratorium. And as I understand it, we're looking at number of STRs, and we can get more granular when the information that you need is good enough. I support Rachel's idea of having a better idea of how many bedrooms and how many beds and how many hotbeds this creates, but as a first step and a next step, I support doing this during the moratorium.
John, any additional?
No, the same. I think counting the beds is a really important step. Might be difficult, but I think it'll give us a greater understanding of what we're up against.
Yeah, it's something that's been used back and forth over the years to justify more or bigger hotels or less or whatever. I mean, you guys all know I did the advertising distribution job with Shealy for 20 years. And so I watched them all close. I watched them be converted. I got a list of 30 small lodges that went away. So suddenly everybody's, more bed-based, and that even is why I think a prior council was like, STRs, great, we need bed-based. But I can't think of any real big development, maybe LIF 1, that hasn't come in with numbers to say, this is how many beds we used to have in our town, and this is how many beds we have now, because of all these lodges have been converted to other things, and that's why we need more beds. And that's why I guess I'm just kind of asking about the follow-up on the sequence of that, of how many beds do we need, and how many beds are we going to get to? That's all. But I understand it can come outside the moratorium, but I think we all need a better awareness of where we're at. And that was before Snowmass added a heck of a lot of its beds that now come to Aspen and change our dynamic quite a bit. As they used to say, people go and they stay in Snowmass and somebody says, where'd you vacation? They say, Aspen, and because they spent a lot of time down here.
And there's more coming.
Yeah, a lot more.
All right, well, thank you for those comments. That's enough information on that
Yes.
track? Okay. I love this next slide. You've got Rick Ballantyne and Chief Pryor up there. That's excellent.
And a member of my staff.
And a member of your staff.
Will remain unnamed.
Which one's Ben? The bearded one.
Correct.
Yeah.
Life safety standards, this is
Yes.
this is industry standard around the country
Yes.
at this point.
Yes.
Great.
And is this, you've got emergency contact down there. Is this also, are we touching on management here?
So
Or do you have
the
another?
relationship between the regulations and management is something that I think warrants a little more exploration. I'm not
There,
really
yeah.
clear on how different communities approach that. Generally speaking, there is a mandate for regulatory compliance for a permit holder. And whether the manager or the owner operator or the host in New York or whomever is charged with providing that service, meeting those regulatory obligations, isn't something that I don't think government typically involves itself in. But what we're envisioning here is inspections, right, which is another question in your memo. But and making sure that there's not a bed blocking a mandatory exit route out of a basement bedroom, right? This fundamental life safety stuff that we don't inspect for right now. Making sure there are carbon monoxide detectors located in the right locations in a unit. Ensuring that there's information about exiting, ensuring that there's emergency contact information for emergency service providers in the community. This is baseline stuff that for a commercial use, we would absolutely require. And again, this gets into that distinction between commercial versus residential. We're not going into John's house making sure that he can get out of his, bedroom if his kitchen's on fire, but we believe we ought to be doing that in these types of units.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'll clean it up.
Question about this, and I fully support it. I'm wondering, just from a staff and enforcement standpoint, are we thinking every STR every year, or is it going to be sort of a random?
I haven't conceived of that.
Got it. Because I'll tell you, I own an STR in red conservative Tennessee, and every single STR, when it gets its permit, has somebody from the city come over and look at all that. Like, we had to go put in an extra window on the 3rd floor for a fire, right? So they do that, but, with 1,000 plus STRs, I mean, just the reality of that, so.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's something we'll have to put some thought into, and it will have staffing and could have, staffing and financial implications.
John?
I think this statement from the packet says it very clearly. Enforce building codes for commercial uses. A property used as a short-term rental should meet commercial lodging standards. It's very straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's support here.
Inspections is sort of different side of the same coin. I did classify this as moderate difficulty only insofar as life safety standards are something that may not necessarily require an inspection regime, right? We can mandate life safety compliance without actually going in and inspecting it on a regular basis. Inspections is sort of the next level to ensure compliance. And this, I believe, would give us a better window into operations as well. And again, sort of moderate difficulty only insofar as either financial and staff or consultant, sort of third-party service provider resources might be needed to provide this service.
It's interesting. I'm trying to think of the lady's last name. Tori, you may know Betty. She passed away not long ago. She was an art. Who was
Betty Farson.
No. She was a artist and contributed to the Red Brick a lot, but she had started a business which was a hotel rating business long time ago. And she would rate the quality of the rooms and does it have a musty odor or this or that. And it really kind of brought the quality of hotels up quite a bit because they didn't want a bad rating from her. She eventually sold the business. But it really strikes me that that's a very, very important aspect. And somebody might, want to try to do that, to say this place is really a hole. I don't think you should rent it. And this place is really great with extra amenities for the guests. But, the inspections for life safety are really important. There's been some bad STR stories out there. I had friends who stayed in one not long ago, and the couple hosting them kind of left their bedroom door open on purpose. They like a little voyeurism with the people who go in to rent. And they were quite shocked by that and had no place else to go in the middle of the night. And there's other stories of people who've gone and went on the swing in the backyard and the tree branch broke off and killed them because, the yard is also part of the safety of what you're insuring. And so I just want to say I think this is very important, and I think it actually is the type of guarantee that a guest of any sort would want from their community they're renting in. Thank you.
I mean,
Is the imagery from Charles' book?
Yes, it's a Richard Scarry book. It turns out it's great for community development's work because everybody has a
understanding.
what is it? Everybody's a worker, you know, and it's all,
Yeah.
they all work downstairs. Anyway, please.
So I certainly support inspections on, before permit is, vacation rental permit is issued. I question on the ongoing, how often are condotels or lodge rooms or lodges inspected? And do we expect the same level of inspections for, as Skippy, I think, called them distributed STRs, or private residence or commercial operations in neighborhoods? Are we expecting the same level of inspection and same frequency for those as the lodges?
Once we've gotten this direction this evening, we'll continue our analysis of best practices in other communities, and we can come back with sort of different examples and then describe that in terms of outcomes, both in terms of life safety, but also in program administration, cost, obligations to the community, so you can understand kind of the trade-offs there.
Yeah, thanks. And certainly at issuance of the permit for the first time.
The bathtub is exactly the same size as my bathtub, so I appreciate that. I was going to say to your point, Rachel, any property that's listed on any of the online platforms, whether it's TripAdvisor, Expedia, or Airbnb, they have robust rating systems built in, and anyone who cares about renting their property is highly attuned to that, because if you're not at the top of that page, you're just not getting rentals. And even ones who aren't on those, who do it themselves, are trying to drive people to Google, because that's how they get found. So there's pretty robust incentive structure there.
Yeah, I agree with Ward, initial inspection, and then I could see something that was either a little more random, or perhaps they should be posted in the units. I mean, you know, think about when you do stay at a hotel and you close the door and there's a little sign that tells you what the fee is if you don't stay too late, and what, you know, everything like that. Maybe there should be a City of Aspen complaint number.
Excellent segue to our next question, which
And
is,
then you could do more frequent inspections on units that have gotten frequent complaints, or a random cycle and some random audits the day we do with sales tax.
Agreed.
Again, excellent segue. The intention here, again, is to get at community impacts, neighborhood impacts, as well as life safety, wildlife protection. This would be in-unit messaging that would again be required at the time of permit around city regulations, noise. What's your trash day for the unit you're staying in? How do we manage recycling in the community? Again, emergency contact information, the idea that we live with wildlife in this community and what that means for people, things like that. And we can build this into a program. And again, this is best practice in a number of our sister cast communities.
Any issues here?
I would actually just add, you know, like from our perspective as an operator, we do all this messaging, and it's not unlaborious to check in at the time of booking, before people show up, the day they show up, the day after they show up, before they leave, and afterwards, because that's literally how many times you have to hit someone on text and email and phone before they pay attention. And so this might actually be a nice little gift to operators if the city could package this in some way, and just kind of take it off their plates. They may find this to be something that's actually quite beneficial to them.
Yeah, you know, here's not related to that, but it's Pitkin County is how to recreate properly on public lands.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Colorado Tourism Office has produced a lot of how to local and how to treat the community right, and maybe some of those should be laminated and permanently installed.
Yeah, bears.
Good suggestion.
Bears.
Dog poop bags.
And dog poop bags. And more scrunchies.
So neighborhood noticing. This is something that we do for a number of different reasons out of a number of different departments in the community. Generally, when the city is going to do something that may be impactful to a neighborhood or to residents, when there is a land use application, you'll see the physical notice as well as potentially receive a mailed notice for somebody who's going through a land use process. This is best practice in a number of communities around the country. Prior to permitting, require notice and a comment period for residents who may want to comment on the potential for a short-term rental to be located within a certain radius of their property. The City of Glenwood Springs institutes noticing, as does the City of Durango.
what they do in Chattanooga, again, like conservative red Chattanooga is, when you apply for an STR permit, there's a 30-day where they put a big sign out front of the property and they alert the neighbors, and if you get more than 3 letters within that radius, then you don't get an STR permit without, going to council and making your case. Now, I don't think we want 1,000 hearings at the council table, but there's like there's a process where the community can protest and say like, hey, we don't want this in our neighborhood, and here's why.
So with council direction tonight, we can explore some of those different approaches to noticing and come back with a proposal for council to
Open to
consider.
looking at that.
Yeah, and I think one of the real issues is going to be whether you notice every year as you're renewed, or is it just a one-time noticing? And I don't know per se, but I mean, I can imagine going, oh, they're going to do an STR. Oh, it'll be so nice. It's okay. And then after a year going, oh my God, I can't stand having that STR next door. I want to now comment when their permit renewal comes up. So we have to see what is the opportunity period on that.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, in light of a comment that John made earlier, that he wasn't aware of all the STRs that are all around him, that maybe an annual notice to the neighbors within 300 feet or X number of feet, that there's an STR operation in the neighborhood, and who the contact person is for that. Just something to toss off for consideration.
Sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot.
And again, we can present options to council and have that more
overlay
detailed
map,
discussion.
Map overlay, anyway, there's support.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is highest degree of difficulty, right? Different permit types. And what we're discussing here, and this is where things get a little confusing sometimes, is permit types as opposed to short-term rental types, right? Unit types. So what we're not talking about here necessarily are making a distinction between distributed short-term rentals and condotels insofar as they're treated differently in the zoning code. What staff's describing here is a permit that would be a different type of permit with maybe a different fee and different regulatory obligations to an owner-occupied unit versus a vacant unit, a whole house versus a partial house, or a lodging type property getting a different permit than a distributed vacant second home type property. And I wanted to describe this in some more concrete terms for council so they can to facilitate some discussion. And so I tried to come up with some different examples of what different what different operation profiles look like. So, you have Terry, she lives in her house in the West End, and she's owner occupied. She lives there, but maybe she rents in the summertime when she goes out of town for 2 months, right? There's the condotel. I think we all know what those are. Those are large properties that are condominiumized and owned. Each individual unit is owned by an owner. And they are centrally managed, centrally booked, right? Again, we're familiar with some of these properties. There's the non-owner occupied or hosted model. And these are second homes, third homes that are posted on the normal listing sites that we're familiar with. And the hosted model it works a bunch of different ways, but essentially they could be here, they could be somewhere else. They coordinate the service providers, they manage the hosting site. The relationship with the owner is purely a business relationship. The owner may have no idea who's in there from one day to the next. All they do is own the property and collect whatever revenue they're entitled to. And then there's the broker manager operated. And again, this is different as well, where you could have a property in town that is represented by a specific broker. That broker has a local real estate license, and they manage a portfolio of properties, and they coordinate the service providers. They vet occupants for the owners, and typically serve as the agent of the owner in a way that the hosts don't. And again, these distinctions get very sort of detailed and muddy very fast. And the reason why staff, just for one more moment, Skippy, the reason why staff has rated this as a high level of difficulty is because as soon as we start developing regulations that try and make these distinctions, we're going to miss people. And we're going to have scenarios that the regulations don't respond to. And that gets challenging from an administrative standpoint. It gets challenging from a legal standpoint. And so staff wants to highlight for council how challenging some of these distinctions can become. And we've also heard you loud and clear that you believe condo hotels ought to be treated differently from a regulatory standpoint. I've heard a majority say that owner-occupied short-term rentals that are occasional short-term rentals should be treated differently than others from a regulatory standpoint. And so we've heard that direction and are preparing a response to it. And the more carve-outs and distinctions we make, the less clear and more challenging the regulatory structure becomes.
Yep.
So discussion on that, please.
My suggestion here is that we not get bogged down right now about some of the details and the differences here, and just ask council members if there's support for looking at these delineations. And the reason I say it like that is because regardless of whether we actually have different qualifications or permitting, it would probably be a good idea to utilize these as categorization. So even if the permit itself is not different, that we would want to know, as we go forward, we're going to want to know, which, is this an owner occupied, or how many owner occupied do we have? How many are non-owner? We're going to want to know some of this information. So regardless of whether we have actual differences in permits in our minds right now, I think it's best to go forward with this at this time to at least get these classifications as part of what we're looking at.
I appreciate very much the clarification there on the nature of the question being asked of council, which is, do you want staff to do the work on assessing different operator types and whether or not a distinct permit might be appropriate, as opposed to what are the operator types? That's not the question on the table tonight. Thank you for that.
So I am supportive because I'm interested in this information. Rachel?
Yeah, I support what you're saying, Tori, and, my just thoughts on looking at it is I could see not going down 10 different rabbit holes, but trying to have perhaps just 3 categories: owner-occupied, condo hotels, and then all non-owner occupied, broker managed, or whatever, hosted, that just those 3. But I think it's really important to think about this, because if we have a condo hotel like the North and Nell or the Gant or one of those properties, I think we're anticipating that they'll be participating in the Building IQ program and working with us to lower our carbon footprint. And that way, condo hotels will be having that requirement because of their location in the core and everything else, whereas all these disparate homes may not. And the only way to really have created equity within that would be to acknowledge that they're different types, that they're scattered site, that they're this, and there may be other requirements for them to participate in Building IQ or other programs. So that's why I think we may end up, but I certainly appreciate that we should keep the number of baskets as small as possible.
Thank you.
So, I tend to agree. I mean, if staff makes a strong case for why all these different permit types are the best way to sort of extract value and the behavior we want, I'm open to listening to that. I think this is going to get very messy very quickly, for the simple reason that the same property over the course of the year could operate as 3 different versions of this because of changing circumstance. It's just going to be really hard to keep up with, and I think there are other more effective tools to do that. I mean, if what we're hoping to do is extract more value from the $80,000 home than the $99 room, we have other tools that are clearer to do that with. To Tori's point, though, I do think it's worth going down this rabbit hole as a means to just understand the meta use of our built environment. It may not be 100% reliable, statistically accurate, but at the time of permitting each year, to ask someone to self-select the box of which they are, I think would be really helpful. And I would break this out a bit more. So you're looking at owner-occupied, worker housing, condo-tel. Then I think you're looking at owner-managed, broker-managed, and manager-managed. And I think breaking up the manager and broker managed are really important because their business models are totally different. So what they're doing with that property is quite different, and it would be really helpful for us to know that. And then I think the other piece that would be very helpful to know is how much is the owner there? Is it owner never occupied? Is it owner 2 weeks a year? Or is it majority owner and they rent it when they're gone? That also I think is going to be really helpful for us to know over time how properties are being used. So I would accept they check their own box as a starting point, just to have some vantage. And for any deeper actual differentiation of permit, I'd need staff to make a strong case.
Thanks. Ward?
Just a point of clarification, it's my understanding that now a person cannot rent just part of their house while they're in the other part of the house.
That's correct.
Okay, so the partial building rentals would be new to any kind of regulations.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, I support this, and I would look at perhaps some parameters to factor in for consideration as the number of times it's rented a year, the minimum rental days, say for example, a minimum rental of 5 or 7 days, that these weekend rentals where bachelor or bachelorette parties come in and don't care about anything, or in the number of days a year, number of rentals a year, and the minimum number of days would be things, minimum number for a rental stay, are things to be factored in.
Thank you.
I know of many people who rent out a bedroom or a lock-off area, so that's not legal currently. Do we enforce that illegality in any way currently?
Our enforcement regime is entirely complaint-based.
Okay. Okay. I think there's value in people being able to rent out their places, so I'm glad that we're
I think
making a category for it, but.
council's had sort of previous discussion about that, and staff is cognizant of the relationship between a sort of council's comments about a diversified bed base and the types of units that we facilitate through short-term rentals. So that's something we're thinking about.
Thank you.
John, any more input on this? I think he has support for kind of looking at different permit types.
Yeah, I do agree with what Rachel said. I'd like to keep the number of different permits down because, as Phillips pointed out, the more different amount of permits there are, the harder it's going to be to facilitate.
Can I just ask for clarification? So I'm in agreement that we shouldn't have a bunch of different permit types, but I am saying that we should use this as a data gathering opportunity to understand the different uses, and I just want to make sure we're talking about both.
Yeah, that's
Agreed.
fine.
Okay.
Another high degree of difficulty is zoning and using zoning to control location and number. The communities shown in the map and included in the CAST survey in your packet use zoning controls. And if a community is concerned about the number of short-term rentals in a community, if the community is concerned about the concentration of short-term rentals in a particular neighborhood, or concerned about housing, again, I think you can see particularly Denver, Durango, Glenwood Springs, Salida, these are housing-focused communities, these are housing-focused regulatory structures. They've used zoning to limit the number and location to preserve long-term housing. Staff's not advocating that that's something we should or shouldn't do at this time. I'm just pointing that out as a reason for using zoning. And excuse me. The zoning controls are helpful in a number of ways. You can get at the number in the community in the aggregate. You can get at the number in particular zone districts. You can ensure that in a pretty fine-grained way, the that residential neighborhoods don't have the same density and intensity of the use as commercial and mixed-use neighborhoods. In our outreach to this point, we've heard a lot of commentary from managers, brokers, operators, owners, and community members about where are the appropriate locations in the community for short-term rentals. And zoning is the tool more than anything else. It is the tried and true tool for getting at being able to introduce that level of control in terms of how a use proliferates in a town and where it's located. And it starts to get complicated fast from a program administration standpoint. Because if you're going to limit the number, if council chooses to pick zone districts, then all of a sudden, program administration goes from, we have X number of permits and first come, first served, to what zone district are you located in? How many permits are already located in that zone district? If somebody vacates a permit, what do we do with it? Do we run a lottery system? Is it first come, first served after that, right? So once you start introducing zoning controls and numerical controls, program administration goes up considerably, and then program equity becomes more complicated very fast. Again, not barriers, just the sort of, in the risk analysis, this is why staff's calling this a sort of high consequence option, and something that will require, I think, a level of thoughtfulness and sort of ongoing program administration and modification that some of the other things we've talked about so far this evening have not.
I'm in favor of zoning. I don't know that the whole exercise can come together without it, frankly.
Yeah, all steam ahead. This is the meat of it. Absolutely in support. And as a guide, here's kind of how I would think about it. From that over-tourism lens, you set a maximum number. So you got 1,000 stones you can put in the bucket. Throw the locals in first, then the lodging district, which is kind of designed for that, then the historic properties that have always operated that way, the condo hotels. I'd then look at zoning restrictions. So are there places where we just don't want STRs, period, to keep them safe? And then whatever the remaining number of rocks in the bucket are, then you need some fair, equitable, lottery type system where, each year, every couple years, people have a fair opportunity to get what remains.
It's one approach. John?
Zone it like you mean it.
Hey.
Lord, any additional?
Yeah, I would look at certainly newly defined zones for short-term rentals or vacation rentals, and perhaps having some exclusion zones, childcare and. But yeah, I think that you can be pretty surgical on this. It does open up a lot of variables, but yes, I support going down this road.
And a sort of, not a corollary, but related to zoning and permitting controls are duration limits. We've talked about permits for owner-occupied units as distinct from non-owner-occupied units. In staff's assessment to this point, there's a relationship between duration and owner occupancy, right? If you're living in your home, almost by definition, your home would be less available for short-term rental on an annual basis than if it's a vacant home. That's an assumption, but I think it's a fairly safe assumption. And looking at duration limits would, again, get at some of the neighborhood and community character concerns the council has expressed and that we've heard in the community. And those duration limits can be by permit type. Those duration limits can be by zone district. So again, this is we've classified this as a sort of high degree of difficulty insofar as it's related to other complex tools that we've talked about already tonight. And when you're talking about duration limits, you're talking about income caps for short-term rental operators. Whereas under the current scenario, 365 days a year is your duration limit. So you could realize that amount of income from your property. If the duration limit were to go to 30 or 60 or 90 days per year, that has financial implications for people, which makes the contentiousness of the conversation greater.
This is one where I think it's the wrong tool for the right problem. I think this is going to be just a bee's nest for us to get into. I think what will be easy is to limit the days per stay. So you could say minimum 3 days, and people can do that relatively easily. If you're trying to limit the number of days per year, it's going to be exceedingly difficult for any operator to do that. Like, the platforms just aren't set up for that. And you're going to have people that end up, they've got 10 days left, and so they have bookings out there, but someone books 30 days, and then sort of, what do you do? How do you walk that back? How do you look at every booking in real time? Like, I just think it's going to be way more complicated than you think. And I think that the easier way to limit the total number of days is just cap the number of STRs. Even if you're able to get this done, which I think is going to be extremely laborious, I think what you end up with is a bunch of people that are unhappy, rather than some people who got what they wanted that year and moved on, and others who didn't and said, all right, I didn't win this year, and I'll come back and play the game next time, and it feels fair. This one, I think, is probably more squeeze than worth the juice.
There are communities that have these regulations in place currently, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Other comments? Rachel?
Well, see if my red light's on. Just in the concept of information gathering, I'd like more information to see what communities are doing and what challenges they've run into because of it. I take you at your word. I can imagine there's a great deal of complexity there. I find the term income cap interesting because we used to talk, or I used to hear a lot of public comments about killing the golden goose. And that at a certain point, if people keep coming here and having a bad experience, no one's going to profit. Their income cap is going to come down because the resort itself is past its prime. And so it's a little bit of, if everybody takes pebble off the beach, when they vacation, eventually there's no pebbles left. Or if everybody takes a little piece of something off of their place. And that's what we're in danger of, is this experience of Aspen becoming something that people do not want to repeat, and killing the golden goose with too much, too many, too expensive, and restaurants that don't even serve the person who gets the $99 a night room rental.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I don't think anyone's ever explained that saying as well to me. And there may be other communities that have developed systems that I'm unaware of that make this work, and so I'd love to see them if there are. I think we're solving the right problem, so if I'm missing something, please let me know.
I mean, at least for me, I would say if we are doing anything with zoning, the short-term rentals that are within the lodging zone could be 365, as far as I can see. It's these other neighborhoods where people are trying to have a normal life and get their kids out in the morning to the school bus and don't want to have them hearing and seeing the weekend party. The part of it is, the more you pay for something, the more entitled you feel to use the neighbors, the neighborhood, the noise limits. What rules? What, they going to come back at me in New York? Give me a break. And it really is occurring to our town. We're just being turned into a wash rag.
So are you, so that I understand the direction you're giving, you favor duration limits in certain zone districts or for certain types?
Yeah, I would see it as more appropriate in certain zone districts than others. But again, you're gathering information, and we'll all see what it adds up to.
So there's three that are, two, no, you're in support of the
I wouldn't
information.
go down this rabbit hole, because from my information, I just think that the limiting SDRs is a better solution. But if staff can say, hey, another community solved this problem, I'm happy to look at that.
Some support for looking at it, at least at this time.
Yep.
More comments down here?
I agree with Rachel. I think more information, the better, and her assessment about, what we've been talking about, STRs in the core are not the issue. I think 365 days a year makes perfect sense. It's in the outlying neighborhoods where I think maybe stays should be limited.
Yep. And I didn't say it, but I do support Ward's general comment about a minimum number of days for a rental. whether it's 3 or 5, I don't know. But yeah, it's the 1 or 2 nights where, it's like gone and the neighbor goes, oh, where happened to our bicycles? I mean, who was that next door to me anyhow? You don't know.
It's more like what happened to our sleep.
Yeah, there's that too.
My feeling on this is by zones, because I don't see a need to limit the number of the stays for somebody coming to the Hotel Aspen or North and Nell or the Gant, but somebody in the West End, I think it really makes, or in the residential neighborhoods. So I think by zones, you define what the zones are, and then what your limits are depend on what zone it's in. So I wouldn't enforce a minimum number of days in the core,
Yeah,
but in
residential neighborhoods.
yeah, residential neighborhoods, I do. And I agree with Rachel, the more you pay, the more you feel that you're entitled to. The later you can party outside. And so, yeah, the impacts, I think, are on the neighborhood and on the community are directly affected by the length of the stay and the number of rentals per year.
Just a couple clarifying statements. At this point in our research, we're not aware of a community that has a minimum night's stay. And I don't know that level of market intervention is something that we can do, but we can certainly look into that. What we're suggesting with this option, this sort of regulatory option, is maximum number of days per year. So
Just to share with you, one of my friends is on the HOA board, and that HOA board is looking at limiting 10 rentals a year, a minimum of 7 days per rental.
I would just say, the characterization that the less number of days means the more problematic has not been my experience. There's definitely an entitlement nexus, and there's a low-end nexus. There's kind of the two poles. But generally, the 1 or 2 day rental is someone coming up for a conference, for their kid's game or the hockey tournament, or very frequently, they got snowed in and can't stay at their current place.
Yeah.
It's kind of that group that comes in, paid a ton of money, and shows up with the 35 cases of champagne that is here for a week that can do that too. So I'm not sure how tight that nexus is.
I appreciate that comment. But, and if it may not be legal or whatever, or there's complications with it, it's just, we're all kind of spitballing here and getting feedback to Philip.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Something that I would need some assistance from the council on is, I hear comments about what these various platforms can or cannot do right now, and I would want to understand how much that influences the type of information we bring back to you. Should the ability or inability of a platform affect your regulation, and to what extent? So I've just heard that mentioned 3 times so far tonight, so I want to make sure that there's a concerted discussion about that, because that heavily influences some of this work that you're directing tonight. Thank you.
And what do you mean by platform, Sarah? I'm a little lost.
It's the software that they market off of. So it's the VRBO, Airbnb sites, et cetera, and it's the backside of it that the owner or manager uses to accept and manage the rentals.
Thank you.
Can I weigh in? Because I've mentioned it a few times. I do not want to see Airbnb dictate the rules of our community. So I don't think it should be a hard stop, but there is a reality check of how much staff time is required for something. And so if it's an easy feature that's built into a platform, we can just require people to do it and know if they're doing it. If it's something that's not there and it's going to require staff to, work with 1,400 individual permit holders on a weekly basis, we just have to be realistic about that.
Right. Okay. Good point.
we're getting down to it here, and I appreciate council hanging in there with me. Again, sort of related to zoning is the concept of concentration limits. And this can be done by zone, by block, by unit type within developments. There was a comment made just a moment ago about an HOA voting to put some brackets around how short-term rentals operate within their property. The best example that I'm aware of, which I participated in a number of years ago in developing, was the city of Durango's concentration limits. And there's two approaches to it. One is the zoning map that you see on the left. The colored zone districts are zone districts that allow short-term rentals in the first place. And as you can see, there are a number of zone districts that have no color. Those are residential neighborhoods that do not allow any short-term rentals. And then the maps on the right are examples of the concept of one per block face zoning, where one short-term rental, the green star, is allowed. These are four different scenarios, four different hypothetical scenarios, where one short-term rental is allowed per block face in the zone districts in which it's permitted. And there's a significant administrative burden here insofar as somebody applies for a short-term rental. The staff person has to first verify the appropriate zone district, and then second, review a database to ensure that there's not an existing short-term rental permit in the block face as it's defined in the regulations. Again, not advocating for a particular approach here, using this as an example to demonstrate that concentration limits can get at some of the community character and neighborhood impact concerns that we've heard from council in the course of discussing this issue over the last few years. This is, again, high degree of difficulty. This is administration heavy. This requires a lottery system for vacated permits. But it's, again, an example of a possible approach. And, you know, as a component of the zoning-based approach, can be very effective in distributing the use through town. So with that, please, comments.
Rachel?
Yeah. This is really an interesting topic, because if you look to other examples, such as liquor stores, a community would say, well, how much liquor store do we need in one block? You know, same with marijuana stores. And then there tend to be regulations that say they have to be X many feet away from a school or a childcare center or other public facilities. So concentration limits are not unusual or unheard of in planning, in land use planning. So I think it's worth looking at. And then I can only think about APCHA, which runs a lottery almost every other week for a limited supply, high-value item. And that if we have to have lotteries for blocks in the future, that would be something we are used to doing for other highly sought-after assets in their community. So I want to take a look at this for sure. I don't know what limits I would set or not by any means. But the other thing I do want to talk about a little bit, maybe this is a good spot, is that I think we all know we have some community members who are going to find that they have had short-term rental permits in the past, and they've been in dispersed neighborhoods or off-transit or in places where we may not think that they belong in the long-term future. But could we grandfather some in a way that says once this property is sold and no longer here, that permit will not be issued in this neighborhood or in these locations in the future? And I think we might want to consider that as a way to ease this in. Thank you.
I'm supportive of looking at this. This is the one that's least clear to me, where I have the least formed opinion. So I would really love for staff to kind of take a look at the totality of everything we've said, our values and these other tools, and really give us something of like, this is our recommendation, to make it more concrete for me, because right now it just feels so nebulous as it's hard to form an opinion.
Sure.
Yeah, I think concentrations within zones are the best way to do it. Certainly in the core, with all the condo hotels, that I would not limit concentration to a block or to a certain number of feet. I would put these kind of limitations on perhaps, you know, further out in the residential neighborhoods, and it's going to be difficult when looking at multifamily buildings, but depending on what the neighborhood character is, that there may need to be some limits and concentration limits applied. It's interesting, the Durango, one per block facing, but these are the different ways to approach it, but I think it should be by the concentration of existing STRs what the community accepts and historically is used. I don't think that the concentrations should be applied, but in outlying areas, I support looking at this.
Quick question, Philip. The 1 unit per block base, does that translate into 4 units per block?
So as you can see from the examples, if you aggregated all those examples on one block, yes, there's a scenario where you could have 4 on a block. But then on the surrounding blocks, there would be none, right? And so the idea is that the 2 blocks are speaking to one another, as opposed to considering a block as a unit of measure. What we're doing, what they're suggesting is it's about the experience for the pedestrian on the street and for the neighbors facing each other, as opposed to controlling what's going on one individual block.
So just to be clear, they're not located across the street from each other?
That's correct. So under none of those scenarios is there a green star across the street from a green star, and that's the intent.
I do support looking at concentration limits, and I think Rachel's point about maybe grandfathering in the existing STR permits, because I know some people that have STR permits in inappropriate areas, and there's going to be some pushback.
We anticipate pushback.
Correct.
So, with respect to enforcement, our current system is complaint-based, and I can't make a statement one way or another about how well it works. I mean, we hear about an issue, we address the issue. Based on what I'm hearing tonight, the level of regulation, it sounds like council may desire. I think moving to an active enforcement regime may be necessary. We had a discussion about inspections. We had a discussion about noticing. These are all things that would require a higher degree of enforcement. And so I'd like to take council's temperature on how we ought to be thinking about enforcement relative to the scope of the regulations. It sounds like you have an appetite to at least consider tonight. And again, just to unpack this a little bit more, this has financial implications for the organization. This has potential staffing implications for the organization, or the need for some kind of third-party service provider.
I appreciate you understanding the full scope of what it would mean, because that potential cost needs to be in the permit fee and the administration fee, and so we need to make sure it's really fully covered. I think that enforcement's important, for a lot of reasons. You could have 2 STRs next to each other, and one STR family's bothering the other STR. I mean, there's issues, and we're going to be in active enforcement at some level. And you'd like to think that, you could start at one place and maybe ramp down if it's not needed, or you ramp up if it's needed more. And, but, it was 2 years ago, the enforcement was just about, are people collecting and paying their taxes? Now the enforcement is going to be about, are they respecting neighborhoods and neighborhood character and community neighbors, and no dogs running loose rules, or whatever else they are. So similar to us listening to how we make sure there's real composting going forward, it takes people. And so I think to see this initiated and run well and explained well, we're going to have to staff up some and take that on.
Yeah, open to and really supportive of all 4 of these. And I think, what I would be targeting is the lightest touch from a staff perspective, which is also the lightest touch to the inflation of the sort of lodging bed cost possible to be effective. So effective should be the bar, but then let's try to keep it as light as we can.
John?
Yes, I support all 4, especially the inspections before a license is even granted.
I have some concerns about what level of inspections and audits we do. I certainly health and safety at issuance of the permit, and maybe annual inspections depending on what condotels and other lodging practices are. Audits, I question, well, what are we auditing? Are we auditing just tax collection, or without giving a blanket statement if I do this? Because I value privacy, and I think that we have to balance what we're going to be inspecting, what we're going to be auditing before I can say I want to have, say, 4 inspections a year or 1 a year, or I want to audit. What do I want to audit? Do I want to audit that people are staying? How many people are staying in the unit? I need to know what is going to be audited before I sign off on it. Outreach, I think, is important, and compliance staff, I can support that, but I need to know what level of inspections and enforcement that we're going to agree upon before I go down the road of compliance staff.
You know, I agree with the privacy aspect, and I don't want to see this become super heavy-handed. But I know that we, unless we've stopped, kind of randomly audit our retailers in the downtown. Are they shipping FedEx boxes empty in order to avoid collecting and paying sales tax when you're buying a $20,000 ring and other items? So it's important for people to know there's some accountability. And that's what I would see as the focus and purpose of an audit.
They never shipped my $20,000 ring.
They shipped it to the wrong address.
Someone gets the empty box, do they open it?
And take the ring they've been wearing off and put it back in the box.
So the next slide that's up on the screen here is for other items. Are there any items from council members that haven't been discussed tonight? Anything that you want to bring to the table in addition to what you've seen this evening?
The only other note that I had, we've talked about, but just that over-tourism piece and a cap number.
Cap number in terms of the
Of SDRs.
number of permits,
Yeah.
sure. And I apologize if it's not clear in the documentation, but between zoning and permitting, there's implied in that, in staff's view, a discussion about either the number of permits, the number of permits within a given zone district, et cetera. So we'll absolutely end up having that conversation.
Thank you. This is super exciting to see the alignment at this table and on staff. And as John said, we expect pushback, and we're ready for that in the best interest of the community.
Yeah, I just wrote kind of as a conclusion that defining impacts, tiered fee structures, in by right for existing condotels, safety inspections at issuance, ongoing inspections, posting of wildlife and neighborhood awareness, neighborhood notice within certain areas away from the core, limit on numbers per year, and minimum stays. So those things that we've discussed previously, those are just a conclusion of what the direction I'm going to see going.
Thank you.
Going forward.
Any additional comments, John?
None for me. I thought it was very thorough. Thanks.
And I don't have any other items to add there. I have a statement for you, but I'll wait to the end.
Thank you. I will note, and I didn't create space in the slide deck to do this, but just based on the feedback I've gotten from council tonight, the list of items you'd like us to explore is long. And our work, staff's work over the next couple of weeks is going to be focused very much on one of those principles I discussed at the beginning of the presentation, what requires a moratorium to get done versus what doesn't.
Right.
And I will, again, a little expectation management, not all this will be done during the moratorium.
Right.
I'm very confident that we can build a program and a regulatory structure that will get at those most important issues that either require a moratorium to get done or will most directly address council's concerns as expressed tonight and in previous discussions. And we can create, I think, a really clear roadmap for getting at the full suite of issues that council has desired us to explore and attempt to regulate this evening. So with that, I will just close by saying we are engaged in engagement presently. And we talked about that a little bit when we were discussing the design workshop contract. If you don't have in your inboxes already our engagement schedule for the next 10 days, I expect you'll have it at some point in the next few hours. In addition to the significant sort of roadshow effort that we'll be engaged in, there's ongoing work and information available and engagement opportunities on Aspen Community Voice. Again, we have a standing technical stakeholder advisory committee that's meeting bi-weekly through the end of April. And the work that they're doing is meaningful and robust with respect to providing feedback and vetting staff and consultant work. Staff is engaged in one-on-one interviews with those who are central to the success of our efforts, but are not on the Technical Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and that includes residents, stakeholders, professionals, advocates. We're doing neighborhood and HOA presentations and conversations. We are using social media to disseminate information to people, print and radio as well. This is happening now. It's robust, it's significant, and I think you'll see it ramp up over the course of the next few weeks. Next steps. There are a number of work sessions where we will be bringing moratorium-related topics to you over the course of the next 2 months. I'll highlight the 22nd of this month, which is a regular meeting for the policy resolution, which will open the land use code up to amendment. This is an important sort of an important ministerial step for us. I expect to return to council for additional discussion on short-term rentals before the end of the month. And at that time, staff's presentation will include what we believe represents a package of amendments based upon the specific topics discussed tonight that need to be addressed during the moratorium and what can be addressed on a longer timeline. And we'll be looking for council's consent to do that work at that time. That's the end of my presentation. I'm open to any other comments and feedback that can help us be more effective on the work we're going to be doing for the next month.
You know, the only thing I would say is that this work is deeply interrelated to the work that we're doing through the capital construction and potential of building new units and picking out housing unit target numbers and everything like that. It's important to our work at APSHA as we see the pressure continuing to ramp up of how to reallocate the housing better to this new demand we're seeing. And I personally have a concern that that demand is heading towards an area of, you know, which workers are worthwhile and how do we get more workers in or less workers and which workers do we not need anymore, and is moving towards a company town model as opposed to a community, sustained community model that our housing program, I believe, was intended to be part of. And so this is part of why I'm very interested in how much new demand we're creating that the community may or may not want to actually accommodate housing for. And instead just find new ways to re-regulate what we have in a very parochial manner and orient it, again, not towards a sustained community. That's really why I deeply want these sort of demand numbers that we're creating by our activities. And I don't want to sign off on a future ordinance that sinks a lot of what has been tried to do to have a balanced community over the past 20 years. And I'm very concerned about that aspect with the demand we're creating. Thank you.
Other comments?
Yeah, I think it's important to draw connect the dots between what STR business models have become and how they're driving the residential development and how they're impacting the neighborhoods. I think that there was a widely perceived connection between high-end STRs and locals being able to rent those, and it's not so much that somebody could rent, a local worker could rent one of those, as the demand it puts for more workers to service those. So somehow to make the connection that the impact that the STR business model is having on the community and on employee generation, FTE generations.
Other comments, John?
No, I just want to thank Philip and the Community Development Department for all the hard work you've put in so far and all the hard work you're about to begin. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, much
Second that-
appreciated.
that comment.
You know, I just want to make a statement that this is not about limiting possibilities and potentials for our community. This is actually about doing our best to ensure some longevity, sustainability, and prosperity for our community, all while keeping a mind and an eye on balance. I was in the CAST Housing Task Force meeting today, and some of the conversation was about STRs and some of the legislature that's being considered. And I just real quickly read you a couple sentences. And while it starts off that says that, you know, the General Assembly and Coloradans recognize that STRs can be a very positive impact for communities and for our state in general. It does say, though, however, resort communities across Colorado are turning down applications, increasing regulations, and even slashing the number of permitted vacation rentals as local leaders and businesses alike grapple with a shortage of affordable housing and a dwindling number of workers. This crisis has forced many local leaders around the state to come up with a slew of regulations to try and alleviate some of the more egregious impacts. This is not something that is singular or unique to Aspen. It's going on everywhere. And indeed, what strikes me here is the use of the word crisis. And that's what we've identified. And I think we are moving as swiftly as we can to minimize any of the negative impacts of new regulations. And again, we're doing it in the best faith for the best future course for our community. And I think it's really great, and I appreciate all you guys being at the table for this.
Gracias.
One parting comment, the boys skiers basketball team is 22-0, and they will be commencing their playoff game in about 25 minutes at the skier dome. So people out there that are looking for something to do after our meeting is completed, because I know they've been riveted to this, head up to the skier dome.
I thought their
Go
last game-
Skiers.
I thought their next game was in Denver, but that Paul's been following it.
I think that the next two could be, if they win tonight, I think they could host a second game, and then the remaining games are in Denver. That's what I understand it to
Hey,
be.
that's great news. See if we can make it. Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, again.
Thank you, Grassroots. Thank you,
Night-night.
WebExers.
Not just.
Have a good evening.
It just looked like
Fix the internet.
they're common characters.
No, the skiers play, I thought the skiers, no, the skiers play Friday, I thought.
I just love that all of our teams that
what
don't
should-
ski are called the skiers. Like,
Yeah.
it just makes me so
Well, they
happy.
ski when they're not playing.
For sure. It's just like, if ever we feel like town's changed a lot, like, it's like, well, basketball team's called the skiers.
There was a time when they couldn't get a football team together
Yeah.
because they were all on the hockey teams.
Yeah, they didn't have a football team for a number of years.
I know. Jeff Usom kind of brought that back.
All right, y'all. Good stuff.
See you, brother.
Good stuff. Yes. Are you going to the game right now?
Philip, I don't know where I picked this.
Can I borrow you for like 1 minute in electric pass?
Sure.